The first thing to remember is that people don't always tell the truth about what they value. And I would argue that, to use Kahneman's distinction of system one and system two, system one being instinctive, automatic, fast, effortless, most of our perception of the value of a thing actually resides in the system one part of the brain, not the system two part. And the problem with system one is it controls our behavior not through the generation of words or arguments, but through the generation of feelings. And as a result, system one doesn't really talk. And so when you engage in conventional market research, and I don't mean more intuitive forms of market research, when you engage in very literal-minded market research, the things people tell you they value or the things people tell you they don't like are really post-rationalizations placed on emotional feelings, which may or may not, and probably more often than not, don't reflect the true reason for the delight or the dislike. Without wanting to go back to the kind of Mad Men era, what happened in the early stages of my advertising life was that advertising agencies went from charging by commission from media owners to charging by hourly fees. The problem was, whereas they grumbled about that a bit, because in some ways it was less desirable, they failed to spot the opportunity that this now allowed them to solve problems where the solution did not involve spending money in media. And so there's a kind of muscle memory in the ad industry which goes, gosh, we've got this business problem, it must lead to a communication, otherwise we have failed. Now, when you're paid by the hour, that needn't be true. You can go in and offer advice on choice architecture, product design, innovation, lots and lots of things from a system one perspective, without necessarily needing to give money to Rupert Murdoch at all. And the problem I think that arose from that is a lot of people never approached an ad agency because they said, well, unless I've got a £1 million media budget, they won't want to talk to me. And so there were a lot of problems, or I think opportunities, that could have been healthily addressed, or at least improved upon in their thinking, by a conversation with someone in a marketing agency of some kind. And I define that very broadly. But those conversations never happened because they assumed, well, there's no point in going to those guys because I'm not planning to actually make an ad. So therefore they have nothing to add and wouldn't be interested in talking to me. And that's a problem we have to overcome. We kind of define Ogilvy change as solving those problems that ad agencies could solve but are never asked to solve. And we sort of, when we look at our income, money that comes not from a marketing or communications budget kind of counts double in our mind, because what we're there successfully doing is reaching out to other areas of the business world or the public sector or indeed the third sector and solving problems in ways that don't involve conventional communications. There's a kind of extraordinary interrelationship between technology, psychology and economics. And if you can hit the sweet spot where all three of those overlap, you're doing something interesting. What is undoubtedly true, okay, is that how you decide and the medium and interface within which you decide affects your choice and affects your behavior. So there are quite a lot of things where you could have had behavioral insights 15, 20 years ago, but it was simply unaffordable to act on them because the technologies that allowed you to create those nudges or design the choice architecture differently, those technologies simply didn't exist. So one very interesting thing is there are businesses like Amazon, businesses like Uber. Uber and Amazon, I mean, Uber isn't really a taxi business au fond. Amazon isn't really a mail order business. They're screen businesses. And what makes them unique is that the psychological effect, the pleasure and the pain and so forth, when we interact with a screen, and the way we choose and decide and act are fundamentally different. So there's a whole new book, by the way, written by Shlomo Benazzi at UCLA, co-written actually with Jonah Lehrer, about this extraordinary effect of screens, that the heuristics we use and the mental shortcuts we use when choosing and deciding on screens aren't the same as when we choose and decide, say, on a paper form. But it is important because there are little things we can do. I mentioned that point that if you applied the Ocado green van mechanism, which is incentivization to choose the most efficient appointment without any financial incentive being deployed, and you took that approach and applied it to booking appointments with GPs in your local surgery. Okay, that could significantly improve access to GPs, particularly among the people who are time constrained, because people who are going to be ill and at home all day wouldn't hog the appointments that people needed when they had to get to work by 10 o'clock, say. You could significantly improve things by doing that, but You're absolutely right. Until the technology of the screen existed to display your choice in real time in the way that the Ocado order slot selection screen works, the theory would be very, very beautiful, but it'd be completely impractical in the real world. Once the screen came along, once the internet came along, then that insight becomes really valuable. There's a tech industry which is the most disgraceful of the lot, which is when you consider that sort of 15 billion is spent buying WhatsApp, which is the state of email is atrocious. It hasn't progressed since, frankly, the early 90s. And if you consider that lots and lots of business people, I don't want to denigrate WhatsApp, but it's basically my kids talking bollocks to each other. But if you consider that there are many, many people in jobs all over the world, and literally 500 million of them, for whom 1 or 2 hours a day are spent interacting with email, and yet the whole experience is as clunky, painful, useless, and lacking in nuance and also in elegance as it was, frankly, in 1995. For God's sake, if someone could disrupt that, just charge me, I'll pay anything. There are other things are interesting. I mean, I always mention that as a tech area, which is, I think, ripe for disruption. But I think there are some other areas. When I talk about choice architecture and the business of creating choices people didn't realize they have, I think there's some very, very interesting things. The pension industry is massively ripe for disruption. It's System 1 unfriendly to an insane degree. The whole design of a pension, the legal and tax rebate mechanisms around it are absurd. There's sort of 30 or 40 billion pounds spent in the UK, effectively counterbalancing the fact that the pension is deeply inimical to System 1 thinking. It just feels wrong as a product. And most of that government money is actually just counterbalancing the appalling design. That would be another case. A third case, interestingly, healthcare. Too many cases to cite. I've mentioned the pensions thing in the area of finance. But if you go into most businesses, you will probably see businesses that are successful for reasons they don't really understand, or businesses that fail for reasons they don't understand because they haven't looked at the System 1 side of the equation. So my answer to that in the wider sense is actually lots of them and in surprising ways.